else, where I felt like there was this gap. It's like we are almost embarrassed to talk about prisoners. We don't want to talk about prisoners because it complicates the narrative, because prisoners have been kind of pushed into this category that is only that only Israel, the Israeli military, the Israeli jailers, the Israeli court, the Israeli government is able to communicate, that perception of Palestinian prisoners, of course, as terrorists, as violent individuals, and the best we can do to counter that is not to argue against the Israeli claims, but rather to provide a humanitarian counterclaim, saying you still have to respect international law, the Fourth Geneva Convention, humanitarian laws regarding the rights of prisoners and so forth. But we haven't really had the courage, and I don't blame any individual or institutions. I think there's a collective responsibility there of taking ownership of the Palestinian narrative regarding the prison experience altogether. And why that is important? Number one, because they are not terrorists and they are not victims either. They are what I call the organic intellectuals. Well, I don't call them the organic intellectual. That's Antonio Gramsci's depiction of people in their position. They are Palestine's true organic intellectuals, and we will talk about this in a second here. But the other thing is that those 5,700 Palestinian prisoners right now in Israeli prisons, held in violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention and all the humanitarian laws and international law, are also people who have been serving as a representation of the wider Palestinian prison phenomenon, or the collective Palestinian imprisonment. I don't think that you will find a Palestinian who doesn't have a degree of ownership over that imprisonment experience. Whether you are living in Area C in the West Bank, which 60% of the overall size of the West Bank, held under complete Israeli captivity, can't go and come back, go to school, farms, hospitals, jobs, and so forth and so on, without a precise permission and permits from the Israeli government and the Israeli military. And even those who are living under so-called Area A and B, which constitutes about 40% of the all sides of the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, they are also living under various degrees of restrictions. They can't move about, they can't go to East Jerusalem, and definitely cannot leave and they cannot come back without various types of Israeli measures and restrictions. And let alone Gaza, which is indeed the world's largest open-air prison. The entire population of Gaza have been imprisoned for nearly 14 years now, since the siege was imposed on Gaza in 2006. I would say a majority of the people of Gaza, since we know that most of Gazans, the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, are young people, so we know for a fact that the majority of people living in Gaza today were either A, born after Israel sanctioned Palestinians or put the blockades on Gaza in 2006, or were too young to even remember the reasons of why the siege was imposed, or definitely were too young to even to vote in the elections that brought Hamas as the representative of the Palestinian people. So they are being punished for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with their very existence, their political thoughts, their ideas, their own behavior, and so forth and so on. So Palestinians have this in common. They are all prisoners. And I would even venture out a little bit more and say that even people like me who are not allowed to go back to Palestine, to be with their families. I haven't seen my family for 25 years now. And I know that there are millions of Palestinians who are not allowed to go back to Palestine, to see their families, to go back to their homes and so forth. We are also suffering a degree of that, of imprisonment as well. So you can't really talk about the prison experience without talking about the collective experience of all Palestinians for the last 71 years. And therefore, it is essential to talk about the 5,500 Palestinian prisoners today because they are the microcosm of that collective experience that has been going on for such a long, long time. The other thing I want to say is that about 800,000 Palestinians were imprisoned to various degrees, several months to up to 40 years. Like Nael Barghouti has been in prison for 4 decades now. Marwan Barghouti has been in prison for nearly 20 years now. And you have hundreds of Palestinian prisoners who have been in prison for decades, literally decades. But also nearly 800,000, according to Palestinian government statistics, have been imprisoned from at any given point from 1967 until 2012. If you do the math, it would be fair to assume that nearly 1 million Palestinian has been imprisoned from 1967 until today, actually taken to captivity and went through the Israeli military judicial system, if the word judicial is even appropriate in this regard. Israel, of course, has no respect, not only for international law, but for the law of any democratic country in the way that they treat prisoners. And that's what we try to do and to document in our book, These Chains Will Be Broken. Now, this takes me to talk about the book briefly. Because of this idea that Palestinians have been marginalized in their own narrative, and do pardon me if I'm being slightly harsh on some of our friends and solidarity groups and people who stand genuinely in solidarity with the Palestinian people. There is a gap in the Palestine solidarity narrative about Palestine. There is always this sense that Palestinians are almost a liability to their own history. So we constantly kind of try to find other people to speak on behalf of Palestinians, because it might appear that Palestinians are just not an honest party in the way that they convey their own history. Despite the fact that we have one of the highest rates of education, especially high educations, anywhere in the Middle East, our women, 19% of all Palestinian women have high degrees. That is like the highest in the entire Middle East region. I don't think you will find one single institution, academic institution in the world, one university in which you would find that you wouldn't find a Palestinian doing something. Could be a professor in chemistry or engineering or literature or comparative religions and so forth and so on. Yet somehow you have entire conferences that are held in which you don't have a Palestinian speaking about Palestine. And this conference is about Palestine. And I find that so very frustrating. And it took me kind of time to, along with many other Palestinian historians, I speak about myself just because I feel like I have the moral authority to speak about my own experience, but I know many other Palestinian intellectuals and historians and academics feel frustrated as well. So we have what I'd like to call the Palestine's new historians, parallels around the concept of Israel's new historians, the likes of Ilan Pape, Avi Shleim, and many others. And our main aim is to retell the story of Palestine entirely, to reclaim the Palestinian narrative by bringing it back to the core issues. And here's the other important question: who is morally and intellectually and practically, honestly, capable of articulating a genuine, authentic Palestinian experience? The Palestinians themselves. The Palestinians themselves, especially those who are at the heart of the struggle in Palestine. And so to think about it even more rationally, it follows that Palestinian prisoners who have made decisions to stand and fight for their people. And when I say fight, I'm not excluding anybody. I'm not disowning anybody. Anyone who stands to fight the vile Israeli occupation and the Israeli apartheid and Israeli siege and the Israeli colonialism is a fighter, in my opinion, regardless of the method he chooses or she chooses to fight with. So whether you're an administrative detention because you are an intellectual insisting on teaching Palestinian history at the University of Birzeit, or you are a Palestinian fighter in Gaza, whether you are a child who raised a flag somewhere in the West Bank, or you are Khalid Jarrar, a Palestinian lawyer who is currently in Israeli prison, who decided to be the one to take Israel to the International Court of Justice and to create this massive file of all the Israeli crimes committed in Palestine since 1967 and pay a price for it. They are all, not just in my own view, in my own opinion, but in the views of most Palestinians, they are true fighters and they are all deserving of our love, respect, and solidarity. And they are also Palestine's true organic intellectuals. Now, what is the organic intellectual? I have been fascinated with this term simply because I am also fascinated by the writing of Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was an Italian partisan, he was a politician, and he was an intellectual who argued that being an intellectual is not about narration. It's not about an oratory skills. It's not about communicating ideas from the comfort of wherever you are in the world. Being a true organic intellectual means to be on the street, to mobilize, to fight, to create strategies, to get your hands dirty, and at the same time to communicate these ideas. So no one in Palestine is more deserving of the title of the organic intellectual than these prisoners, because not only they actually stood there and fought for the right of their own people and paid a heavy, heavy price for it. And every single one I have spoken to in that book, not a single person, even those who spent 30 years in prison, even those that I spoke with who are still in prison, and we found ways to communicate, whether through their families, lawyers, or through cell phones that they have smuggled into prison. I haven't yet spoken to anybody who said, I had any regrets, that I apologize for anything, that if I knew better, I would have not done what I have done. Not one single person. And that is something I found across the board, whether I spoke to people who vow allegiance to Fatah, Hamas, the communist parties, the socialist parties, independent, secularists. That is something you have all across the board with these prisoners. But they are neglected from the way that we tell the story on Palestine. They are marginalized, even amongst us Palestinians, because if I am going to speak about such and such, I have to take responsibility of the fact that Ramzy Baroud, was accused of taking part in a military operation against the Israeli occupation. How do you explain that to the sensibilities of Western mainstream audiences? You feel like you completely lost the argument just by arguing that Ramzy Baroud had the right to carry a gun, if he indeed has done so, and we trust the sources of the Israeli military courts. This is why we felt it's not an issue that we wanted to talk about. So even amongst us Palestinians, we walked away from the issue because it's too sensitive to discuss. So who has the right to discuss it? The prisoners themselves. So we approached a large number of Palestinian prisoners who have been freed, the families of those who are still in prison, or the people that we managed to communicate with indirectly and who are still in prison. And the first thing that we asked them to provide their own story in the way they see it. And here's the sad part of our sad reality, is that there was this defensiveness, the defensiveness of the Palestinian who is being examined by a Western institution or intellectuals. So they immediately kind of go into this defensive discourse. We are not terrorists. We have done what we needed to do to defend the rights of our people. And I was like, no. Nobody is even, considering this item. It's not even on the agenda. The idea here is, I want you to explain to me, to the world, to your own family, to your own children, to describe a moment that represented the core of your experience, something that served as as a representation of your entire experience of imprisonment, humiliation, torture. It could be anything. And the beautiful thing, and that's why it's really kind of cemented my view that indeed we have tapped to the core of Palestinian organic intellect, is that it wasn't a struggle to make that point. It's like they immediately got it. And the answer was, nobody discussed his faction. And I don't care. Many of them are mentioned in the book. You don't know if they are Hamas or Fatah, socialist or otherwise. It's of no essence. And I'll tell you a little story about why factionalism ended up being so insignificant to their narrative, even though it may seem to be important to the everyday political discourse in Palestine. People start talking about the wives they left behind, about the fact that they died without seeing their mothers, about their children, about their art. There was a prisoner who learned 16 languages in prison, 16 languages. I actually had to test him because I thought this is ridiculous. How can you possibly learn 16 languages, including languages that do not exist? They are ancient languages in books only. So we actually had to talk to him and bring a linguist to see if he indeed, and in fact, he did learn 16 languages. And for him, all that mattered is that he wanted to use his years in prison to learn. And the struggle of how the Israeli prison guards found every possible way to confiscate his books, to prevent him. Like, for example, let's say there was a Lebanese prisoner who was held in the same cell, and he spoke French. And that was an opportunity for this Palestinian prisoner to practice his French that he learned from books. The prison guards would know this, and they would separate them. In fact, the issue, and we give so much attention to the issue of education in prison, and I credit Khalida Jarrar for the immense contribution she had made to educate women prisoners who were denied the chance to finish their high school diploma and high degrees in prison. And because of Khalida Jarrar, who was a prisoner herself, many months spent in solitary confinement, tortured, humiliated, and yet she found loopholes and she found ways to actually educate women and managed to actually have them finish their high school diplomas. So the prison experience is not about terrorism or not terrorism. It is a fascinating, vast subject that requires our attention. And the story I want to tell you that in Turkey a few months ago, there were several Palestinian freed prisoners that I wanted to follow up on our conversations over Skype or WhatsApp and what have you. And I wanted to bring them together, and one of them was Hamas, one of them was Islamic Jihad, one of them was Fatah. And the idea was to speak to them separately because, you know, everyone has a factional agenda. That was my intention. And then I thought I did not have enough time, so I'm going to bring them together and see what happens. So they got together, we met in a cafe, and they were a little bit hesitant. They greeted each other respectfully, but kind of like, it's like as if they each represents a different school of thoughts, and you had these kind of barriers amongst themselves. Yet when they start talking about, the Hamas person start talking about his torture in Israeli prison, and the Fatah guy says, were you in this prison at this time? And he said, yes. He said, oh, you must have been tortured by this Israeli officer. He said, yes. He said, well, I was tortured by the same person. Did he use this tactic with you? And then suddenly there was massive overlapping of experiences between all the prisoners. And then suddenly Hamas, Fatah, Islamic Jihad made absolutely no difference whatsoever. They ended up being comrades, sharing the same struggle, sharing the same stories, sharing the same narratives, sharing the same aspirations and same collective experiences. And at the end, when they left, they hugged and kissed and cried in the process. And I felt like, my goodness, even amongst ourselves, we might not even realize how well connected we are, how cohesive our narrative as Palestinians, and all of these superficial separations and barriers are completely irrelevant to our narrative that truly matters. Very briefly, before I read a couple of excerpts for you, I just want to say that we have been, my previous books, The Second Palestinian Intifada, A Chronicle of a People's Struggle, My Father Was a Freedom Fighter, The Last Earth, A Palestinian Story. Every time we felt the need to move a step closer to giving to the platform, unhindered to Palestinians to tell their stories. For me, it was a struggle because it was a learning process as well. I did my PhD at the University of Exeter in the UK with Professor Ilan Pape, and I tried so very much to marginalize myself, to be the person with the team that I work with who create the platform, that create the connections between the various stories and the various narratives, but do not get directly involved and influence the way that the story itself is being told. That was the idea. And now I feel like with this particular book, these chains would be broken. We wanted to go a step even further. We wanted to train the prisoners, since we believe that they are true intellectuals, to tell their story directly. So some of the stories are actually being written word for word by prisoners and edited by us just for, for the purpose of creating continuity between the various stories and chapters. Some stories are conveyed through storytelling by prisoners, and we try to keep the dignity of the story and the nature of the story. And some prisoners are artists. They want to communicate via their paintings. Some of them, like one prisoner told me, he said, "I'm too embarrassed to talk about my experience." And I said, okay, is there any way you can communicate it without having to sit, this is a very strong Palestinian man who endured 11 years in prison and stood in front of every Israeli judge and every Israeli torturer, his head held high. He didn't want to talk about his love to his wife, or how he lost a friend of his in the same cell, and he was afraid he was gonna cry. So I said, how do you want to communicate it? He said, I will send you messages via WhatsApp, audio messages, and you do with it whatever you want. And I said, fine. I woke up the next morning and there were hours of recording, and it was the most beautiful story. And you will find it in the book. It's called Ghadir. Ghadir is the name of his wife, and in it he sobs so much. And I called him back, of course, and I said there was absolutely nothing for you to apologize about, because I'm sure a lot of people are gonna shed tears reading that story as well. But it was also humbling to see this very tough Palestinian man who in the beginning began lecturing me on what he told the Israeli judge and how he raised his finger and how the officers came and started beating him up, and yet to kind of see the very extremely soft, romantic side within him that he was too embarrassed to reveal. And that's what I wanted to communicate. And I hope that we have succeeded in doing so. Just because I don't want to exceed my time by too much, I want to read to you two short excerpts. One by a little girl. Her name is Dima. Some of you, especially those who have been following the Palestine Chronicle coverage, we covered Dima's story a lot. Dima was a 12-year-old girl in 2016. In the story, you will hear more details about how she got arrested by the Israelis. She was ill. She was looking for her mother near an Israeli settlement that has been expanding progressively and took over most of the land belonging to that village. She wanted to go to the local clinic. She was looking for her mom. She got lost. She found herself face to face with the guards of that Israeli settlement. Now, these are large men, well armed. This is a skinny little 12-year-old child. So one of them pins her down, stomps on her, calls the army, and he says, there is a Palestinian girl who had a knife and who has, she tried to stab the officers. I mean, imagine this 12-year-old gaunt, skinny little girl standing in front of these giants with their massive, arms, and she's trying to stab them. And Of course, Palestinian eyewitnesses, her views, none of this matters before an Israeli military court. And the story received a fair degree of coverage because she was a 12-year-old, and that created a legal dilemma for Israel. Do we keep her for a certain number of years and try her as an adult, or what do we do with her? They kept her for several months. And eventually she was released, and we spoke to her and to her family as well. And this is what she told us. They transferred me to Hasharon prison. There were screams and loud noises coming from everywhere. The Israeli officer who interrogated me told me that I would be imprisoned for a long time. It was so shocking to hear that. I never thought I would endure such an experience. I had heard of this happening to other kids, but I had no idea that it would happen to me too. I did not know that the occupation was so criminal and so unfair to this extent. But I told myself, Dima, you have to be strong and face your reality the way it is. Then 7 large officers entered the room and began interrogating me all at the same time. I was afraid. I kept repeating, ما عملتش إشي. I did not do anything. But they kept asking, swearing at me and yelling in my face from morning until the evening hours. Before they left, they tied me to a chair that did not even stand on proper legs. I tried so hard to find a comfortable position. It was impossible. I stayed that way until after midnight. Days passed without me being able to see my family. Only a long time later, my mom was allowed to see me. I was missing my dad, my brothers, and my sisters. But just seeing my mother's beautiful face made me happy. She held me close to her for a long time. Her embrace is always so warm, but then she had to leave. When she did, I felt that my soul and my heart left with her. This is a very short excerpt of Dima's story. There is the story of Isra Ja'abis. If the name doesn't ring a bell, you know Isra Ja'abis. She is the Palestinian woman who was burnt in her car when Israelis opened fire. Israeli soldiers opened fire at her. She was born in Jerusalem and she lived in the West Bank, and she was on her way to Jerusalem when this happened. So most of her body was burned pretty badly. And she was sent to many years in prison. And what's so incredible actually about this, and that's something you will realize in the book itself, that Dima was telling us that she said many of the prisoners, she said, I wasn't scared because many of the women prisoners treated me as if I was their daughter. And I said, can you name some of the prisoners? And she said, Isra Ja'abis. Not knowing that we actually interviewed and spoke to at length with the sister of Isra Ja'abis, just to show you the connection between Palestinians, that at the end of the day, when times are tough, they behave as a family, and everybody kind of claims his role in that collective struggle. So Isra Ja'abis, despite of her endless agony and pain and being sentenced to many years in prison, and the fact that the Israelis are not allowing her to do surgeries on her hands, on her face, and so forth, immediately kind of claimed the role of the mother for Dima, 12-year-old Dima, when Dima was imprisoned in the same prison of Hasharon. I just want to read a brief excerpt from Isra's story as told by her sister. So it starts like this. A year and 2 months later, Mu'tasim, that is Isra's son, was finally allowed to see her. He was 9 years old then. I took him as my mother could no longer cope with the pain of seeing her daughter in that condition. But the prison guards did not allow me access to her room. They only allowed Mu'tasim to talk to her from behind the glass barrier. He begged them to let him hug his mother, and finally they relented, agreeing to allow him to spend 10 minutes with her. I watched from behind the glass as Isra walked in wearing a tiger costume. She had sewn it inside prison, as she knows how much Mu'tasim loves the Winnie the Pooh cartoon. She even designed and wore a tiger mask. When Isra was younger, she loved to dress up in costumes and perform as a clown for various community events for children. Mu'tasim told her, I know that you are my mother. I don't want Tigger. I want to see your face. So she removed the mask. Mu'tasim was shocked. His eyes filled quickly with tears. He told her, I love you no matter what. He told her that the acne on your face will go away. When it was time to leave, he clung to her, refusing to let go. The guards asked me to intervene. Mu'tasim kept repeating, you either let me stay or let her come home with me. On the way home, Mu'tasim told me, after a long silence, my mom will always be beautiful, even if the acne never goes away. I hate to make sale pitches, but you know, we had this massive plan before the whole outbreak started, to go and speak in various cities and countries. And the idea was we really wanted to get prisoners involved via satellite, via Skype, to bring some of them who are based in Turkey to come and talk directly about their stories. And sadly, all of this had to be postponed or canceled. So we are using webinars, we are using this kind of technology to reach audiences and to talk to people. And so if you do want to learn more about the stories of the prisoners from prisoners themselves and help us build this new Palestinian narrative that is situated within Palestinian priorities and communicated by Palestinian organic intellectuals, please do consider purchasing the book, whether through your independent bookstores, through Clarity Press directly, which is the publisher in the US, or from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and so forth. Adam, I think I have maybe exceeded my time, so I will stop at this point and see and give you the mic.
Dr. Ramzy, thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for reading extracts from your book as well. I want to say that I've personally read the book. I've been fortunate enough, and I want to just thank you again. I've thanked you before, but it's very beautiful. And I think that it's such an important piece of literature and of resistance, I would say, because it's not just a book. It is a compilation of people's experiences. And I think you were very right to say that it is very much the core of the Palestinian issue, just like the right of return. And they are so closely knit together that we cannot separate them. And I would also say that it's beautiful that you included you know, paintings and artwork and poetry. And I just wanted to very briefly read one poem that you included from Darin Tatur, which is called Resist My People, Resist Them, for which she was imprisoned by Israel. I want to say that Darin Tatur she's a Palestinian poet who lives in Israel. She's a Palestinian, you know, citizen of Israel, and she has been in prison for a long time because of her work and because of this poem. Resist my people, resist them. In Jerusalem, I dressed my wounds and breathed my sorrows, and carried the soul in my palm of an Arab Palestine. I will not succumb to the peaceful solution, never lower my flags, until I evict them from my land. I cast them aside for a coming time. Resist my people, resist them. Resist the settlers' robbery and follow the caravan of martyrs. Shred the disgraceful constitution, which imposed degradation and humiliation and deterred us from restoring justice. They burned blameless children. As for Hadil, they sniped her in public, killed her in broad daylight. Resist, my people, resist them. Resist the colonialist onslaught. Pay no mind to his agents among us, who chain us with the peaceful illusion. Do not fear doubtful tongues. The truth in your heart is stronger. As long as you resist in a land that has lived through raids and victory. So Ali called from his grave, resist my rebellious people. Write me as a prose on the agarwood. My remains, heavy as a response. Resist my people, resist them. Resist my people, resist them. So this is a poem that Darin Tatur went to prison for. I wanted to ask you, I had some other questions prepared, but I think this is very relevant because you spoke extensively about the organic intellectual. Why do you think Israel imprisons people who write poetry?
Because Israel understands that true resistance in Palestine is situated within the cultural aspect, cultural resistance. This is not about guns and bullets. It's not a judgment on armed resistance, but it's not, because if it is about arms and bullets, well, I mean, the Palestinian Authority have, tens of thousands of so-called security forces, and they all have guns and loads of bullets. Many of them are permitted by Israel, and that doesn't make a difference for Palestine. The true resistance in Palestine is the resistance of the people, the individuals, the artists, the poets, the storytellers, those who refuse to bow down, those who are used to be pushed down on their knees. They are the ones who give us the everyday, strength to carry on, despite of the fact that all the odds are stacked against us. To give you an example, after every Israeli war, pretty much on Gaza, they target mosques and churches, amongst so many other things, schools and so forth and so on. And yet, every single time, the moment that the war stops and a so-called truce is achieved, the people would stand on the ruins of the mosques and they will make a call for prayer. And then they would go and pray on top of the ruins of these mosques, and the church bells would ring throughout Gaza, and the faithful would go and they would pray. Now, in my opinion, this is cultural resistance. Cultural resistance takes on numerous forms, because at the end of the day, resistance is a decision. It's a collective decision made by the community. A poet has an audience. And a poet influences other poets, and a poet influences fighters and resistors and activists and a whole different generation. I grew up in Gaza reading Mahmoud Darwish, reading Ahmed Matar, reading so many other Palestinian, Mu'in Bseiso, and so forth. And I felt, and of course, listening to the music of Marcel Khalifa and Samih Shqair and so forth. And I feel like if it wasn't just the experience of living under Israeli occupation, but the need to articulate that from a cultural point of view, I needed the poet, the musician, the dancer, the artist to animate my thinking as an individual and therefore as a community. And Israel knows this so very well. I remember one time I was stopped with my father at an Israeli checkpoint as we were leaving Gaza at one point. And there were like hundreds of people who were kind of pushed into this large circle, surrounded by Israeli military and tanks and all of this. And And as usual, the soldiers had the microphone and they were taunting us. They were laughing at us. And they were saying, come on, I want, one by one, just making fun at us just for the sake of passing time. And I remember they asked one person, they said, a young person, they said, if you want to pass that checkpoint, you have to read a poem for us. And he said, yeah, fine, no problem. He takes the mic and he starts reading a beautiful poem by Mahmoud Darwish called Sajil Ana Arabi, write down, record, I am an Arab. And it's a celebration of working class Palestine and the resistance, cultural resistance against Israel. And the soldiers were fuming and they are trying to, wrestle the mic out of him, and they are punching him, and he kept reading the poem at the same time. And I thought, my goodness, I mean, if this is not an epic display of cultural resistance, what is? They were meant to humiliate and to taunt us, and we turned this against them. And the people started chanting, hundreds of them, after we were all sitting in this hunched position, huddled beside each other, waiting for the soldier to make that determination for us to live or die, go or leave, stay or not. And then suddenly, because of a single poem, it's kind of like we completely reclaimed our power as a collective over that moment. Now, this is a moment. Imagine this applying to every aspect of our life. In the way we name our children. After Ali Dawabshi was burned to death, how many newborn Palestinian children were named Ali, right? That is cultural resistance. And Ali was mentioned in the poem by Darien Tatour because it's engraved in our minds that Ali is something so special. And he was an infant when he was burned to death, but he's gonna carry on for generations, and he's gonna represent something, layers and layers of meaning that is going to surpass me and my generation to another and a third and a fourth. That's what cultural resistance is. And that's why poetry is extremely dangerous from the eyes of Israel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramzy. That was, I think, the best response that could have been given by anyone in the world, probably. Thank you so much. The story was very, very beautiful, especially. And I think that how inspiring art can be in resistance, especially, has been conveyed 100% by this. So I have a first question here from Romana. A question for Ramzy. As you said, this book was very helpful to give Palestinian prisoners their humanity back, since Palestinian prisoners are dehumanized since the moment they are detained until the very end, and also in the representation of them in the media. Don't you think it also contributed to humanize Palestinian women again or back, since they are often targeted by many cliches and stereotypes?
Absolutely. And when I approached my previous book, The Lost Earth, I intentionally wanted to make sure, in journalism, I believe that if a story does not have a female voice, is not a story, because you can't erase, half of the humanity as if they are not part of the way we understand everyday reality. In literature, I think the same thing applies, and I wanted to make sure that the number of stories I had in my previous book had an equal number of men and women. In this book, I didn't actually bother with this because I realized that if you are following the line of a story, a line of a narrative, in a rational and equitable way, you are going to have the female voice. And in some strange way, the female voice ended up dominating this book, even though it was not intentional at all. Because there are aspects of the story that is so emotional, that are not necessarily the stereotypical, bearded men with kufiyas and guns firing in the air, as you see on CNN and BBC and so forth. That the Palestinian story is far more multi-layered, and there are aspects of it that cannot be conveyed through this kind of stereotypical representation. And as a result, wherever we tap into a story, the female voice comes out, and the female voice is not also to be over romanticized either. The female voice is not just that of the loving, caring mother and the faithful wife and the the emotional daughter. No, 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 no. That's not at all what the female voice is in the book or in Palestinian society as a whole. Because I spoke to a Palestinian fighter who went to avenge the martyrs of Sabra and Shatila and joined a group of fighters, and she was the leader of the group. And she was held and imprisoned in Al-Khayyam prison in South Lebanon for years, and the kind of torture that she had to endure without compromising, without admitting to anything. It is something that is frightening to even hear, let alone experience yourself. And of course, there's Khalida Jarrar, an educator and a lawyer who's constantly aware of her rights and the rights of others, and is trying to mobilize and empower her own community within the women prisons. And there is Darine Tatour, the poet who decided to write a new poetry for the sake of the book to send the message to Israel: I'm not scared of you. You imprisoned me for a poem, here's another poem, and a third and a fourth and 1,000. And even little Dima, the 12-year-old that we asked her, what do you want to do when you grow up? She said, I want to be a journalist because I don't feel like there are enough people telling the stories of Palestinian children prisoners. These are empowered women, an expression of an empowered community in Palestine, that despite of this unsettling, subsisting sense of this empowerment we feel because of the so-called peace process, Mahmoud Abbas, the factionalism and all of this, if you actually tap beneath the surface of all the cliches and the news headlines, you would find that the power of Palestinian society is so palpable. And you can't see it, you can't understand it without understanding the centrality of women within that society as well. And that's what we tried to do, but without any form of journalistic or intellectual patronization, as in, women are so important and they have a voice. No, they don't need me. They don't need anybody to give them a voice, because they are absolutely essential and they are core in the collective struggle of the Palestinian people. They just need people who are honest enough and decent enough to accept and to admit to that fact.
Thank you so much for the response, Dr. Ramzy. Next question. First of all, this is from Tilan. First of all, many thanks for your utterly emotional talk. It made me think how privileged I am sitting in my comfy room in Europe. A question: in proceeding with the cultural resistance and reclaiming Palestinian right to freedom, how are intersectional voices of the LGBTQ plus community, LGBT plus Palestinians included in the narrative?
Right. So I don't, as I dealt with the issue of women, I don't like the segmentization of any narrative, Palestinian narrative or not. I feel like authentic, genuine narratives would have to flow in an organic way as well. There has to be a natural flow, as opposed to kind of superimpose issues that that may be relevant or not to an issue. I think we have to understand intersectionality within Palestinian society, because that intersectionality exists within our own society as well, but also at a global level. We can't think of Palestine as a distant issue, being emotional or not, we agree with it or not, being pro-Palestine or not. It can't be seen as that way. It has to be seen within a larger global dynamics. I remember one time during a talk I gave in Seattle many years ago, a gentleman stood and he said, well, Palestine, but do you know that people of North Korea are struggling with this and that? How come you're not talking about North Korea? And it just kind of gives an access to the thought the way that some of our intellectuals kind of communicate struggles is that to care only about Palestine is not to care about Kashmir. To care about Kashmir is to turn your back to the Rohingya. It can't be seen that way. The essence of a human struggle is a collective experience. And I'm sorry to borrow from the cliche coronavirus epidemic, but think of it in terms of virus. Colonialism is a virus. Military occupation is a virus. Apartheid is a virus. And when that virus hits Italy, it's going to hit South Africa. And if it hits South Africa, it's going to affect Russia and so forth. We know of the kind of relationship that Israel had with apartheid South Africa. Even evildoers have intersectionality amongst them. So it naturally follows, and it makes perfect sense that I can't look at the suffering and the struggles and the marginalization of Native Americans and African Americans and say, this doesn't bother me. It's not important to me because it's not about Palestine. And I can't look at the landless societies in Brazil or the economic strangulation of Africa and say, this doesn't bother me because it's not about Kashmir. If I approach it from that point of view, we will never get anywhere. We will always be weak and divided and kind of our energy is going to fizzle out. We have to find that connection in order for us to fight a global fight together. And I make a claim that the Palestinian cause should be central to this global voice, because you have a situation in which you have 19th century colonialism at work right now. I mean, in parts of the world we have the privilege of talking about neo-colonialism. In Palestine, you are talking about colonialism, plain and simple. You are talking about South Africa-style apartheid and more. You are talking about genocidal wars that involves the United States, Israel, and some of the largest and most powerful clique of countries anywhere in the world, and who's standing in defiance. Few million people in Gaza and few million people in the West Bank fighting with their poetries, with their songs, with their kufiyas, with their bullets, with their empty fists and so forth and so on. So it is, in my opinion, the most morally compelling cause that will, number one, because the Palestinian people deserve this kind, and yes, the Palestinians in historic Palestine 48 as well, and Palestinians in diaspora and everywhere. But because Palestinians deserve this kind of solidarity, because they have been left alone, victimized by the international order that resulted from World War II and the United Nations and so forth. They owe us that much, that those who have subjugated our people take their moral and legal and political responsibilities and in the suffering of Palestine. But also because it is a true microcosm of the global war, the global colonial, neo-colonial war that is at work right now everywhere in the world. So this is why, when I'm in South America, or when I share platforms with Native American intellectuals or African American intellectuals, when I went to speak to the Maori people in New Zealand, when I went to speak in Hawaii, to the native Hawaiian people, when I went to speak to the Zulu nation in South Africa, to the Kenyan community that fought against colonialization in Nairobi, it immediately clicks. You don't need to make a case, a victimization or otherwise. It immediately clicks. They know who you are. They know why you are there. They know what kind of, nobody ever asks me. I tell you the truth. When I am in the Southern Hemisphere, no one ever asked me, what can we do for Palestinians? Well, we are here just sitting and, I feel for them really, but what can I do? Nobody ever asked that. It's almost this kind of natural repositioning. You know exactly what to do because you are doing it. Your fight is part of our fight. And your struggle is part of our struggle. And I stand in solidarity with all of them the same way they stand solidarity with us. So this is the intersectionality we need to do. This is, so not only we need to reclaim the Palestinian narrative, we need to reposition the Palestinian narrative within its proper historical parameters. That of anti-colonization, I know, you can't say this in polite companies, but it is what it is. This is not about peace process, folks. It's not about, do Palestinians have, representatives to speak to? Does Netanyahu have a peace partner or doesn't he have a peace partner? This is media gibberish. This is nonsense. It's an anti-colonial, it's an anti-apartheid struggle. It's a war of liberation. We are leading a liberation movement, and let's stop redefining Palestine to accommodate the sensibilities of politicians and media folks and frankly, also Western progressive activists who kind of push Palestinians out of the way, and they are, pretending to speak on our behalf. Let's talk about it. It is what it is. It's an anti-colonial struggle. And this is why, as I said earlier, we connect easier with people who led these anti-colonial experiences in the Southern Hemisphere. And this is why it's absolutely essential to adhere as if it's a religion to the principle of intersectionality, because we are much, much stronger when we fight together.
Dr. Ramzy, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I think we can all agree on these points. And I think that I've posted a video of a group of African Americans visiting, and one of them is a rapper called Vic Mensa, and he actually posted a music video, and it's very beautiful. I suggest that everyone has a look at it, because it really showcases just how important this solidarity is, and how natural, exactly as you say, it feels right to be, as a Palestinian, to feel for the Native Americans, for the indigenous people everywhere. Or that's why the Algerians also, who obviously battled the French colonialism, feel so strongly about the Palestinians. I'm mindful of time. Do you have more time, Dr. Ramzy? Do you have...
If maybe one last comment or question, but
okay.
Because other commitments.
Of course, no problem. So I think just to touch on this subject as well, I think it's really important. So there's a question from Yusuf Al-Jamal. How do you see hunger strike as a tool by Palestinian prisoners to gain their freedom and regain some of their rights? And possibly maybe just choose one of these two. What risks Palestinian prisoners might face in light of the outbreak of COVID-19, as one freed prisoner recently tested positive once released? So I think, just to keep it, obviously, the issue, I will leave it up to you. I think you can make the right decision. Right.
So yes, of course, the second question first, and very briefly, is that we know that Israel is and it's extremely foolish of Israel, but apartheid and military occupiers are usually foolish anyway. But they are under the impression that if the coronavirus spread amongst Palestinians is not going to harm Israel. It doesn't work that way. So there are Palestinians, we know of Palestinian prisoners who have been tested positive for the coronavirus. Some of them are quite old and ill, and various human rights organizations have been demanding Israel to release them as the same way they have done with hundreds of Israeli prisoners. Not a single Palestinian prisoner has been released so far. So this is a kind of a compounded issue and added to the massive suffering by Palestinian prisoners. Yusuf Al-Jamal, I want to kind of do a shout out for Yusuf. Yusuf was an integral part of this book and previous books and projects as well. Also his cousin Abdullah Al-Jamal, who have done really a massive service to Palestinian prisoners in his work and the interviews and the translations that he has conducted. And I thank them both very much for this. Just very briefly about the idea of the hunger strike. Usually when there is a hunger strike taken by Palestinian prisoners, we don't pay attention until it reaches a point where, 48 days, 56 days, 90 days, and so forth. And then they start mattering to us because they are about to die. So it kind of matters as a humanitarian issue and so forth. But there is more to it, of course, than all of this. The hunger strike it's not an individual decision; it's a collective decision in Palestinian prisons. And usually, because they are denied so many rights and they are tortured and they are humiliated and they are denied access to their families quite often. The quality of the food, the quality of the life, everything pretty much is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention regarding the treatment of prisoners. So the way it's chosen is not just an individual deciding to go on a hunger strike. That individual goes on a hunger strike as a first line of defense to raise awareness of the struggles of everybody else. In fact, in the book, we documented how the collective hunger strikes work, how usually the youth, the younger people, people in their teen years and their 20s start the hunger strike, then joined by people in the middle-aged prisoners, then finally by the very old prisoners and the sick and so forth. So it's a conscious process, and it's incredibly elaborate and courageous as well. But it's also kind of another line of defense of resistance. I mean, imagine a moment in which you are alone, isolated, hungry, naked. Nobody is paying any attention to your plight. The Red Cross is not even able to document your case whatsoever. No international observers, no family, no lawyers, nothing. You are entirely and completely on your own. And yet at that moment of utter and absolute weakness or supposed weakness, it's the very moment that you declare that I still have the power to fight with my hunger. And I think there's something, I mean, aside from the incredible humanitarian toll it takes, and I hate to over-romanticize these kind of things, but there's something utterly romantic about it as well. There's this sense of sacrifice. I prefer my freedom over my own life. I mean, really, it is as simple as that. And in the book, we spoke about Ramzy Baroud, a relative of mine in Gaza, who perished in prison, died because of medical negligence. And yet, despite all of this, when we spoke to people who knew Faris, he said, despite the fact that he had kidney issues and he died from kidney failure, at the end, he joined every hunger strike until the very end. So yes, indeed, hunger strikes take on multiple meanings. And in the book, we really try to explain that this is not just a headline for the news. Such prisoner on his 65th day hunger strike. Know that there is something so incredible that goes beyond all of this, and we have to understand it from their point of view. So I thank you to Yusuf for all of his work and help, and wish him the best with his studies. But I also thank you, Adam, for this incredible opportunity to really reach more people and to connect with all the lovely people who joined us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramzy. I just sent you a private message. There is a freed prisoner. His name is Naji Ode. He would like to say a few words. Is that okay? We'll just take a minute.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Naji, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, do you hear me?
Yes. Hello, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ramzy. It's amazing to hear you. And I agree totally with you, actually. When you speak about the global issues, we are fighting for Palestine because we are Palestinians. And we are in the same line and same direction with the other prisoners or other nations. They are looking for, are struggling for their freedom. When you talk about the weapons, for example, when you talk about the poem, yeah, sure. If we remember the story during the 1987 in Nakab jail in desert. Now it was two parts, like one part in Gaza side and the other part it's called Kelisheva, I don't know what they called it, Ketziot, whatever, and the other side. Now one Palestinian writer actually is not poem, but he wrote as a song in that moment. Because we live in the desert under the tents and there is nothing, just only we have to manage and to survive daily with the hot, very hot water. We don't, we don't have enough even to take a shower. We don't have like to wash, whatever. And we, in that period, we were living like when we going to sleep, it's shifts because somebody have to be wake up and to control because of the scorpion and the snakes in that time. Now, This guy, this writer from Desha camp, he wrote a poem, and after that we changed it and we developed it as a song. And in the same time, we share with all the sections in Nakab Desert, with all the prisoners. We were 12,000 prisoners in that time, in different sections. Now we wrote the song in paper and we cover it, we put a stone inside and we cover it by something and we throw it to the other section with appointment. Everybody read this song, and we decided the time that all with loud voices, all the prisoners, to sing this revolutionary song against the desert and against the occupation, against all the system. And this is, I don't know, it's in Arabic, it's not in English, but I will just only read this a little bit. We say, Ya nakab kuni irada. And the name of the writer is Salah Abd Rabbo. He's really a very great person. Ya nakab kuni irada, kuni majdan wa riyada, kuni shamsan, kuni darsan min durus al-intifada, ya nakab kuni irada. أرادوك لنا قبرا وقلبنا القبر زهرا وحلمنا الليل عشبا ليلة ذات سيادة يا نكب كوني إرادة. Now with this word, it's really, it was very strong, and they make the police and the soldiers totally crazy how with loud voice everybody in jail start talking in the same voice, in the same time, in the same hours. They make them crazy. This is the first. The second, also when you talk about the painting, for example, there is a paint in Hebron jail, here in Hebron. Someone, he drew lion behind the bar. And it was really lovely, this, you know, this photo and this painting, and we hung it on the wall. And the police, they come usually several times to check inside. They are just only check inside. They will not find nothing for sure. And finally, they decide to take it. And we say, no, if you can take it by force, but if you ask us as the responsible of the painting, we will not give it to you. And they say, no, I will take it. I said, okay, you can take it, but we don't want to give it to you as a gift. And he come back after and he say, okay, now I take it because even while you are lion, you are behind the bar. We said, no, the opposite. Now, when we are behind the bar, we still lions and we fighting and struggling for our rights. Now, okay, now finally he say, okay, I will take it. I said, okay, as you want, but for me, I don't want to give it to you. Finally, he say, okay, I will give it to you I will take it as a gift if you allow to me, and I keep the same meaning, what you mentioned, and the meaning of the painting. And we say, okay, now you can take it. He took it. After years, we back several times and we find this guy and we said, what's the meaning of it? And he said, it's the same. Each one come to visit my house. I told them the story of the painting and the meaning as you mentioned. Now this is crazy, you know, with the painting, yes, it's a strong message, a strong weapon. The third point, I agree totally with you. When you global and when you speak about the capital system and the imperialism and the fascism and whatever, now we have our own enemy clearly. Who is our enemy in the world? But as you mentioned before, yeah, people, they confuse, okay, coronavirus make some people, they talk about the equality, which is not, I don't believe the international law. I don't believe it. It's written and it's in the desk. It's not exist at all for me. I believe, you know, the international law, when they decided for the Palestinians to return back to their homeland for resolution 94, doesn't exist since 72 years until now. Why I should respect that? Why I should believe that? Now, we have to build bridges and links with all the free people around the world to struggle for the same against our enemy, and we will succeed for sure. And we will succeed for sure if we work together. Sorry, because we are divided and we work in different kind of agendas. I am sorry for that, but we still fighting and struggling. We're looking for the freedom, not our freedom as a persons. We're looking for the freedom of the nations, of the new generation to continue and to live for freedom in the future. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naji. It was great to hear from you. And I will ask you for the text of the song later on, and it would be amazing to translate it and to send it to people. I think that'd be a really good idea if you'd like to do that. All right, great, amazing. Dr. Ramzy, thank you so much again for this amazing opportunity to have you and to hear you speak and to hear passages from your book. It was very, very beautiful. Thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. I wish you very well. And I just wanted to say to everyone that you can support, obviously, not only Dr. Ramzy's work, but the very idea that Dr. Ramzy is putting forward to reclaim the narrative of our struggle and to struggle in this fight for freedom and to really use the means of cultural resistance, which are so effective. So we can do that by, I know I've noticed that there is a fundraiser happening right now for the Palestine Chronicle. So I will put a link. So if there's someone who hasn't shared their email with us for so far, I would encourage you to do so. I will share the link to donate to the Palestine Chronicle, which is an amazing platform, and of course, a link to the book as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramzy. If you would like to say anything, please do.
No, just a final thank you to you and to all the lovely participants, but also another special thank you to Naji for, it was such a lovely treat. Just none of this was planned. To kind of see someone who actually lived that experience is particularly exciting for me. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us, Naji, as well. And hopefully we can do this again.
Hopefully we will. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramzy. And thank you everyone for coming. يعطيك العافية.
الله يعافيك.
مع السلامة. Thank you so much, everyone. If there's anyone who hasn't posted their email, please do. It was great to have so many people join this late at night, of course, because Dr. Ramzy was joining us from the United States, so we had to accommodate for different time zones, which is always a challenge. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. So I will be closing the meeting now. Assalamu alaikum.